Good evening, everybody. Welcome back for another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardwan. Back with me in the red tie this week. It's an off week for the Horns, so you're allowed to wear red. I'm allowed to wear blue.
You know, and I didn't bring the glasses, but I
It's
think
an off week, dude.
I think I should put them on anyways.
You need Astro glasses.
Ghost Tros.
That's right.
You know,
we're playing right now. I feel bad for our guests because we brought them on game 5 of the ALCS.
We were robbed.
We were robbed.
We
literally Joe West should have been charged.
I agree.
I think they should have arrested him. I think they should have charged him with something. We could come up with something. We were actually sitting in the office today thinking of causes of action against Major League Baseball.
With the amount of ridiculous causes of action that our current district attorney is doing, I can figure out at least.
You can figure out something.
I can, yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of causes of action and crappy cases that I'm sure these two ladies will have to review at some point, we've got a couple Court of Appeals candidates tonight from the Democratic side of the ticket. We have Sarah Beth Sorcha Landau. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You bet. And we also have Meagan Hassan.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Here.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to be with us for the next hour. We'll be talking about their runs for the Court of Appeals. Sarah Beth is running for the first Court of Appeals, and Meagan is running for the 14th Court of Appeals. So we'll open up your phone lines if you want to call in between innings or whatever you want to do. Hopefully you're watching this show tonight. 713-807-1794 is the number. We also have Twitter up. And you can message me right here at HCCLA_TV. So let's just jump right into it. You guys are, let's set the stage a little bit, because most of the candidates we've had on have either been county court, district court. Those are the trial courts in Harris County. And you guys are running for the appellate court, the next stage up. And this is kind of the first wave of appellate courts. You have the 1st and the 14th here in Houston, and those are your automatic direct appeals, that if someone is convicted either in county court or in district court, or if you have a civil verdict that you want to appeal either in family court, probate court, or regular civil district court, it would go to y'all's court next. And then from there, it would either go to the Court of Criminal Appeals or the Texas Supreme Court. So let me start with you, because you told us before the show you were going to tell us about how you got your name, Sorcha.
Yes.
So start off, tell us a little bit, tell the audience about your background and where you got the nickname from.
Well, let's start with the nickname because that's more fun. My given name is Sarah Beth, but no one has ever called me Sarah Beth in my entire life until this campaign, although it is the name I file all of my appellate briefs under.
Right.
So it is my legal name, and that is the name I decided to run under. When I was a child, I was known as Toots, which is not probably maybe it is a good ballot name, I don't know, but it is not a name that I used past the age of 11.
Like polling on
Toots.
that?
It seems like that might not be appropriate in 2018.
Maybe not for an appellate court judge, but yeah, that was my nickname when I was a kid. No one ever called me Sarah Beth, and I've been
I feel like that's watching a 50s TV show. Hey, Toots, how's it going? You know, kind of thing.
My uncle is that guy.
Yeah.
And that's who gave me the Toots nickname. But I've been Sorcha for almost my entire life after I was Toots.
How did somebody call you Sorcha?
It is the Irish for Sarah.
Oh.
Really?
Yes. And
that's so cool.
And I am not majority Irish, but I am a little bit Irish.
Not like
Don't even try to do an Irish accent. Please, God, do not try to do it.
I kind of want you to.
I'm totally about to. No, I
just don't do it.
I can't.
So you're not originally from Texas.
I am not.
But you got here as fast as you could, like everybody else.
Indeed. I moved here from New York to clerk for Vanessa Gilmore, and I've had basically my entire legal career here in Houston.
So are you one of the former clerks who has told her when she has to retire?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm not in the habit of telling Judge Gilmore what she has to do and when.
She said the other day that some of her clerks had banded together to tell her when she needed to retire. I'm sure that's entertaining, huh?
Yeah, that is. I do enjoy the clerk reunions more than almost anything. It's a really, really good group. But for the less interesting part of your question, I am in the Harris County Public Defender's Office, and prior to that, I spent 10 years in the Federal Public Defender's Office doing appeals as well as trial work. And before that, I was at a little law firm called Vincent and Elkins. And before that, I clerked for Judge Gilmore. And before that, I practiced a year in New York doing complex commercial litigation.
Where'd you go to undergrad, or where'd you go to law school?
I went to law school at Columbia University, and I went to undergrad at Minnesota.
And when you started V&E, that little law firm, where?
Here
in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up mostly in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I moved to New York as an adult.
And so V&E brought you to Houston?
Judge Gilmore brought me to Houston.
And why did you decide to do that?
It's actually a little bit of a funny story. So I applied for clerkships, and I found out much later that my professor never sent the letters of recommendation. So you need 3 letters of recommendation for most judges. But in Texas and California, some of the judges only require 2 letters. And so that is how I wound up in Texas.
What made you decide, when you came to Texas, was it everything you wanted and expected?
I was very surprised by the lack of horses and cowboys in Metro Houston area. Yes, I know, I am that person. But I very quickly fell in love with the city. And every time I've even considered leaving, some other great opportunity comes up. So
now this opportunity is.
Yes.
Every single moment of her entire life has led up to this.
That's right. Let's let our other guest introduce herself.
Yeah.
Meagan Hassan.
I'm fascinated
You're fascinated. But we want to hear about
story.
you as well.
I know.
So tell us your story about how you got down here to Texas.
Well, I originally moved to Austin. I graduated from law school right before the recession. And I moved to DC to do a job with a firm doing international tax compliance. It was not
stimulating.
Yeah. The firm doesn't exist anymore, shockingly. So I was laid off as part of the big purge of 2008. And I had a good friend from a study abroad program who lived in Austin and was starting a new firm. And he asked me to come down and be the associate here. And I said, why would I want to move to Texas? This is crazy. I had lived internationally and on the East Coast most of my life. And I moved to Austin. And I really enjoyed Texas. I was shocked at how much I really liked Texas. And I traveled a lot for the firm. It was a small general firm. We did a lot of administrative law work in Austin and some personal injury, some business litigation, things like that. But a lot of my work would bring me to Houston. And so when he asked me to be a partner in 2011, I said, absolutely, on the condition that we move our office to Houston, because I really loved Houston. And
you said you lived internationally. Where'd you live?
I lived in Cairo. I lived in Tokyo.
Really?
Yeah.
Cairo, Tokyo?
Yeah. And for a little while in France. And that was pretty much it. Oh, and Sweden. I lived in Sweden for a while.
Sweden?
Yeah, I did.
Nice.
You got all the accents, don't you?
Sweden.
That's a little bit better than your Irish accent.
That wasn't a high bar to set, Meagan. Let's be honest.
No, it wasn't.
So Sorcha's background is mostly on the criminal side. Your background is mostly on the civil side.
It is. I mean, my background is primarily civil. I've been doing 1983 civil rights litigation almost exclusively for about 4 years, but since 2009, we've been doing that kind of work.
So 1983 actions, talk to us about what that is and what that means.
Sure. It's the federal enabling statute for the Constitution. So if your constitutional rights are violated, then you can sue the government using 42 U.S.C. Section 1983.
If I'm not mistaken, I've tried to sue the government a few times, and I've failed miserably.
Yeah.
There has to be some sort of colorable claim, right?
Yeah, it has to be a colorable claim. It's a violation of law under the color of state law. And so you have to have a state actor, and they have to be working in that capacity.
So like cops beating up people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Generally when they're on duty. It's hard to make a case when a cop is off duty.
I found that though they really have to beat the person up. Like soft
They're very
tissue kind of
fact-specific
stuff.
cases. They're very, very fact-specific cases. And the law is not particularly favorable. The Fifth Circuit, which covers Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, is not, it's one of the worst circuits in the country for plaintiffs' law in this particular field.
We have a lot of, I have a lot of clients who say, oh, well, cops tased me, cops beat me up, these kind of things, and they want to sue.
Right.
But without you losing a limb or breaking your leg.
Well, one of the elements of a cause of action is damages. And so, yes, excessive force is a significant damage, but without long-lasting damages, sometimes there's not enough damage to be worth it for a lawyer to take it. And sometimes if it's a one-off case, you can't get a nonprofit to take it. Nonprofits in Texas tend to only focus on cases that are bellwether cases or cases that...
You said bellwether. What does bellwether mean?
It's a case that'll change the law for an entire class of people. So instead of taking just a tasing case, which happens unfortunately way too frequently, they will look for a case in which someone's right has been violated, and then and if they win the case, it will set a precedent that allows for an entire class of people to be protected. Like, we had a case where we argued the right of individuals to film the police, and we were able to get that established as a right that people have in the Fifth Circuit, which hadn't been done yet. It had been done in a couple of other circuits, but in fact, in several circuits, the courts of appeals have found that there is no constitutional right to film the police. And so there's a circuit split on that, and eventually it'll go to the Supreme Court.
So if I go in and the Stros lose or win, and I have to film some cops doing some things.
Yep. You have the right to do that now.
Totally cool with doing that?
Yes, you have the right to do that, as long as you don't interfere with them in any way. And of course, that interfere language is very, it's flexible from their point of view.
I want to ask you, because you brought out and I want to throw it to both of y'all, because you brought out an interesting point talking about the Fifth Circuit and how unfavorable it is for a lot of plaintiffs on 1983 cases. A lot of people, a lot of lawyers will say that our Texas State Court of Appeals are very unfavorable for not just plaintiffs in civil cases, but for criminal defendants. I imagine that that's got to be one of the things that y'all have looked at and one of your platforms, right?
Extensively. I have looked at it. I looked at it pretty closely because I can do the compare and contrast, because I used to do federal appellate practice, and while the Fifth Circuit is not probably a defendant-friendly place to do appeals, it is in comparison to our local courts of appeals on the state side. And I looked at it, and it's about a 2% reversal rate on the state side. And
wow.
You mentioned that you have some experience in federal appeals?
Yes.
Is that what you did on the federal side, or
I did.
Talk to me about that.
I did both appellate and trial work. So I started off in the Federal Public Defender's Office as an appellate lawyer, and I really enjoyed going to court more than appellate practice allowed me to. So then I started doing trial work, and I kind of geared down my appeals.
How long were you with and where were you with the Federal Public Defender's Office?
Here in town for 10 years.
And was most of it spent at the trial level or on the appeal level?
It was a mix. The first probably 7 years was all appellate, with just occasionally helping out on trials, and then I switched over to full-time trial work.
Did you win any of them?
I did have one criminal trial. Very, very, very few cases go to trial on the federal side, but I like to say I'm undefeated in federal trials because I did win. I got a not guilty on my first trial.
What about your appeals?
Cannot say that I'm undefeated, but I did have some pretty significant victories, particularly in the Fourth Amendment area.
And what was your inspiration? Okay, so I guess they hired you on the federal appeals side?
Yes.
Okay, and so what was your inspiration behind that?
To do federal appeals. I did actually a pro bono federal appeal while I was at Vincent and Elkins, and I enjoyed doing it, and I thought, if I did this more than once, I bet I could do better than this first time. I wanted to really kind of hone it and they had an opening, and my friend who was leaving said, "You've got to apply for this job. You would love it."
Why would you leave a massive salary and job to go to the Federal Public Defender's Office?
I mean, not to be super corny about it, but it felt like a calling. I really, really felt like this is what I was meant to do.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It felt, as soon as I sat in my chair and my Formica desk, I was like, this is it.
That's amazing.
I don't know about
That's
that,
really cool.
I want to go back to your 2% statistic and throw it out for both of you. I mean, why is it that it seems when a criminal case goes up on appeal that it's just a rubber stamp affirm for a conviction? When in jury verdict, rubber stamp the conviction, whereas you flip it to a civil case, plaintiff goes up, plaintiff wins $100 million, and that jury verdict is vacated, so quickly it'll make your head spin. I don't understand how the same Harris County jury can be so right 98% of the time in criminal cases and so wrong almost 100% of the time.
It's about 60% in civil cases.
Still.
It depends on what kind of civil case you're
Right,
talking
and it
about.
depends on how much money the plaintiff gets.
But specifically, personal injury cases tend to be overturned more often than other kinds of jury verdicts.
Right.
By the First and the 14th Court
Why do you
of
think
Appeals.
that is?
Do you want to talk about the civil side, and I can
Sure.
talk about
I mean,
the
civil side is.
Say it.
No, I mean it's not that I don't want to say it. It's just a matter of it's a difficult proposition to kind of determine why. I mean, clearly there is there are a lot of private interests behind tort reform in Texas. Obviously, the tort reform that happened in 2004 has had a significant impact on civil lawsuits, and so those organizations, especially Texans for Lawsuit Reform, which is the big spearheading organization, they are influential with the judges that currently sit on the courts of appeals. And I think that when you look at donations, each one of them has received a sum of money in every cycle from Texans for Lawsuit Reform. Does that mean anything? I mean, I don't think you can say it doesn't.
Right.
And so I think that there is a lot of influence on the courts of appeals that maybe people don't like to talk about. Yeah,
because I mean, what is the thing you always read in a criminal appeal? We don't want to invade the province of the jury.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they do not hesitate to do it in a civil case.
Yeah, that's
right. You just don't.
But what do you think that you bring to if you were to be elected, that that you change or?
I mean,
or not?
I think that balance of plaintiff side, criminal defense side, is just something that's completely lacking on the courts of appeals right now. I am not as experienced a criminal defense attorney as any of you, although I do have misdemeanor criminal defense experience. And of course, my work on the plaintiff side of the bar, on the civil side, is important. I think it's important to have judges that understand where the clients in these appeals are coming from. I mean, I think it's very easy to kind of sit in that ivory tower and think of these people as not people with problems and people who have background interests.
You talk about an ivory tower. Do you think that people have been sitting on an ivory tower in the Court of Appeals?
Sure. Yes.
Sorcha, you were going to talk about the rubber stamping process on the criminal side a little bit.
Yes.
It seems to go on.
A couple things. One, I think we've got nobody on the court right now with criminal defense experience, and we sorely, sorely need that. All of the judges are civil in nature, with a couple exceptions, one of whom is retiring. And it's to the point where you are lucky to get the former prosecutor on your case if you're bringing a criminal case on appeal.
Right.
At least that person understands the stakes. I think it's sort of that the criminal cases are the redheaded stepchild of the First and 14th Court of Appeals, because those folks, the current justices don't understand that area of the law as well. It may not be as important to them because that's not the world that they come from. Mm-hmm. And frankly, if you only have so many hours in the day and you have demands on your time, are you going to be more responsive to your supporters for your campaign, or are you going to be more responsive to the Constitution? that will push you into an uncomfortable place potentially as a justice who has to stand for election every 6 years.
Do you really think that that pressure's there? Do you really think that they've made concessions to their private interests and such?
I think it sets up a situation where it's very tempting to do so because, again, there's only so many hours in the day. The press of business is huge in the Court of Appeals. They're extremely busy. Mm-hmm. So if you have a whole stack of criminal cases and you have like one civil case, you could, if you wanted to, because the law is there to say we don't want to invade the province of the jury. This wasn't preserved. There's very aggressive finding of waiver in criminal cases. It's easy to not give the attention that those things deserve in order to guarantee meaningful appellate review, which I think is lacking.
Well, why do you think that you'd be a better appellate judge than the ones that are sitting now?
I have the criminal defense experience. I also have the civil experience. I was a civil lawyer in total for probably about 8 years of my career. So I can do both. And also, I'm not accepting money from special interests, so that appearance wouldn't be there. I also have experience representing the most vulnerable members of our society. I've been in those bail hearings at 4 a.m. when people are at their worst, and I'm just trying to get them a fair shake in front of a judge by video.
Well, let's talk about that. And so you left an ivory tower job, go work at the public defender's office, federal. And then I remember when you came into the Harris County Public Defender's Office to take another job that probably pays you way less than you should. Alex Bunnan's the man.
He is the man.
He's the man, okay? He's the man. Alex, you're the man.
You're the man, Alex.
But
we all agree.
I find it so cool when he's walking down the street and I'm like, Alex, what's up, man? That's just him.
I feel that way too.
Yeah, I'm like, what's up, dude?
Just don't do it in an Irish accent.
Yeah, I'm like,
we're all good.
I can't do it in Irish. Yeah, I was gonna try. Okay, so, I find it fascinating that you gave all that up. Why did you leave the public defender's office to come to the public defender's office, the Harris County public defender's office? Why would you do that?
Well, I really wanted to go back to appeals after my years in trial, and there was an opening in the Harris County public defender's office, and there is a lot more I felt that I could do for folks over here than I could on the federal side.
Do you think that you're going to get that black robe syndrome?
I think if you are worried about it, you're on the right track as a justice. I think you should be worried about it.
The interesting thing I think about the Court of Appeals is you can kind of slide anonymity there. Mm-hmm. You really can. I mean, the opinions don't get published. It's not like oral arguments. It's not like the Houston Chronicle's down there covering the 1st and 14th court on a regular basis and like, ooh, we got to scoop this and really, what are the justices questioning about? I mean, you can live in anonymity on the 1st and 14th court for a long time.
That's absolutely true. I mean, how many attorneys do we talk to every day who don't even know who our opponents are when we say their names?
Yeah.
And
yes.
And that's a real problem, really, but at the same time, it's also, I think, a very good thing, but only if our courts were properly balanced. Right now, as Sorcha was saying, that because these judges are beholden to the electorate that elects them and to the special interests that, put them forth for election, they are, I mean, and in very many ways, we are also beholden to a different portion of the electorate. But these judges sit in 3-judge panels, and they are supposed to discuss with differing points of view from differing backgrounds and experiences, and right now there just isn't enough diversity of experience on those courts to make that difference. And so I think that if the courts were more balanced, even from a partisan standpoint,
sure, that
there would be a lot more honest discussion, and you would see a lot different tone of the opinions that were coming out of there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right, that we have courts of appeals with justices who really come from a very, homogenous background. I mean, they're for the most part, they all came from big civil law firms. Mm-hmm. I mean, with a few rare exceptions here and there, that's what you get. But one of the questions I wanted to ask y'all, because we've seen some focus here, and Sorcha, I'm sure you're keenly aware of it, because it kind of started when you were still at the Federal Public Defender's Office, was that the courts of appeals were starting to really focus on the fact that here 98% of all cases are resolved through plea bargaining. And you give up rights to appeal in a plea bargain situation. And so you end up with a lot of situations where somebody's rights, constitutional rights, may have been violated in the plea, but they've waived all their rights. There's really no record to necessarily review. And that's on the federal side. And it's even worse on the state side, because typically there is no record at all. There's nothing on the record. I mean, and it's shameful of our state court system that we sit there and we have these people sign away their lives, sign away their rights to appeal, plead guilty, stipulate to facts, stipulate to a sentence, and none of it is on the record. Not a single bit of it is recorded by a court reporter. And then if we get somewhere down the road and the person still has the right to appeal, but there's nothing to really appeal because there's no record.
And so the only thing is those papers that they sign that say you can't appeal.
I mean, how can you, as a court of appeal, how can you effectuate change to the lower courts on that issue?
And should you?
Yeah, and should you?
Well, I think that there's a long way to go in terms of the role that the Court of Appeals could play in tightening things up at the district court level. I think they, at least on the criminal side, they've almost wholly failed to serve as a check.
Yeah.
And I think
the county court level too.
I tend to agree. So first of all, knowing that someone is actually there looking at these cases as they come up on appeal, I think will force everybody to kind of tighten up a little bit in terms of how they run their court. Maybe, when you write an opinion, maybe not move from A to B as quickly as possible, but if there's something missing from the record, note that. Mm-hmm. And not just place the blame on the poor defendant appellant who that was not his or her choice to not have it recorded. So it starts with being transparent about what happened and being clear about who has what responsibility in the proceedings.
What makes you think that you have tough enough skin to do that? Because you're going to have to write opinions, you're going to have to sign them, you're going to have to write dissenting opinions. Why do you think that you are able to do that?
I'm a 12-year public defender. I think I got it.
So let me ask you, though.
Yeah.
Your criminal experience is a little bit less.
Sure.
What makes you think that you're qualified to run as a candidate?
I understand the Constitution.
You do.
So I mean, I think that's a great deal more than a lot of people who end up on the appellate court have when they first get there, and certainly even now. I think part of the problem is that for the longest time, these courts, again, like she was saying, just don't serve as a check on either the lower courts or on the state legislature. 90% of appeals, you were talking about the way that the appeals come up through the system.
Right.
And 90% of the appeals that the 1st and 14th Court hears never go to the Texas Supreme Court or the Court of Criminal Appeals. They stop there. And so we would be the court of last resort for so many of these cases. And so because in a lot of ways these courts have abdicated their responsibility to provide a check, not just on the lower courts, but on state legislature writing patently unconstitutional laws, there are candidates from the other party who have told me, well, our responsibility is to follow the law as it is written. And I said, that is the legislature's responsibility. The legislature writes the law, and the courts determine whether or not it's legal for the legislature to do what they're doing, basically. And so because the courts have served as kind of a rubber stamp for the legislature for such a long time, there's this idea, I mean, why even bother having courts of appeals if the law is written? You're just supposed to follow the law as it's written.
So you weren't just born with this. No. What's your inspiration behind it? Like, I mean, okay, so why? When and where did you decide that, this is something that you should do?
I mean, I lived in New York on 9/11, and I was married to an Egyptian national at the time. And it was a real shock to my system as somebody who had been born and raised in the United States, how individual rights of not only residents of this country, but citizens of this country, could be erased by legislature. And I want to believe that the Constitution means something. I want to believe that we have these constitutional protections. And so it really informed my decision to focus on civil rights.
So I'll ask you the same thing, Sorcha. Why the Court of Appeals? I mean,
well, I'm primarily an appellate practitioner. Even when I was in the litigation section at Vincent & Elkins, I did a substantial portion of my time as appeals. So that's a natural thing for me to do in terms of trial court versus appellate. But I was really inspired to run because of some circumstances around this race. We have a historic opportunity to take the Court of Appeals, the majority of it, and put some people on the court who are willing to make a difficult decision, even if it's an unpopular decision, if it is the correct decision. And I don't want to run and go through all this just to be writing a whole bunch of dissents all the time. Poor Judge Alcala on the Court of Criminal Appeals, I think that's a very rough row to hoe, and that's not something I'm terribly interested in. So this is a chance to have some folks who are like-minded and to really work as a team to make the best decisions possible.
How has y'all's campaign been? Because this is not just a Houston or Harris County specific bench. I mean, this goes beyond that. It covers Harris County, it covers Fort Bend County, it covers, I believe, Galveston County, Brazoria, and Chambers.
Oh, and it goes all the way out to
Austin,
Colorado,
Washington,
okay. Grimes.
Waller, Grimes.
Right.
Yeah, basically I've described it as it's from Houston all the way down to Galveston and halfway to Austin.
Yeah. So
Texas.
I mean, it's a big swath.
Not Montgomery County, though.
No, that Montgomery County goes to the Beaumont Court.
Right.
Which makes total sense because
Total sense.
everybody who lives in Montgomery County commutes into Beaumont for
Right.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
13th, right? Out there?
9th.
9th. I had one out there, and then they kicked it to Corpus.
Yeah.
And Judge Nora Jackson, just as she got her PC on her DW, no PC'd, I made bad law. And then she writes the opinion on some bad law I made. It's absolutely terrible. We all know you were drunk.
So.
Wow.
No assumptions there. So
Sounds personal.
How has it been campaigning? I mean, you're not doing what a lot of the other candidates that we've had on. You're not focused just on Harris County. That's so right. You guys have got to get out in the other counties and get people to know who you are. I mean, that's got to be a tough thing as two Democrats marching into places like Fort Bend County that have been historically very heavily Republican, and out further west in Waller County and Austin County and those sorts of things. What kind of response do you get in some of the more traditionally heavy Republican counties?
It's been pretty surprising how positive the response has been. I think some of that is due to some action toward the top of the ticket. Beto O'Rourke obviously has stoked huge enthusiasm all over the place, and including in rural places. We went to a Beto O'Rourke rally to kind of spread the good news about the Court of Appeals in Navasota. It was packed. This VFW hall had 700 people in it.
Wow.
And a lot of times people can't get in to see Beto O'Rourke, so they're quite happy to, while they're standing in line, talk about the Court of Appeals, which you would not think people would be that interested in, who are not lawyers or have a stake in the system like that. But I think people realize, maybe due to recent current events, we all have a stake in that system. We just may not have realized that before.
Yeah.
Well, talk to us.
I'm sorry. In some counties, we are the most local Democrats they even have on their ballot. And so in Colorado County, besides the statewide candidates, there's us, and that's it. They don't have a single Democrat running
Really?
Countywide. And so we are, I mean, I remember when I first started running the race was back in July of 2017. And one of the first meetings I went to was a Democratic club in Lake Jackson down in southern Brazoria County. And there were 100 people who came out on Saturday at 10 a.m. to a VFW hall in the middle of Clute. And it was just shocking. And so I don't think it's just the top of the ticket. I think it's also people who aren't on the ticket that are stoking the ideals of Democrats everywhere. The
idea of running a local campaign is is paralyzing. We've talked to a number of candidates, and we've seen a number of candidates who have run on the local level. How have y'all been able to balance your personal life with that?
It's been hard. I'm not gonna lie. It's been hard. I've had to give up certain things. Usually I teach at Thurgood Marshall School of Law. I teach appellate litigation. I've had to not do that this semester, which I dearly, dearly miss. I think my husband may or may not be able to pick me out of a lineup. I hope he can. But it's, you know, it's so important. This race is so important that it's 100% worth it. But it's not without sacrifice.
You speak about a husband. Where's he from? How long have you been married? Do you have children?
My husband is from Lahore, Pakistan. We've been married just over a year. Actually, maybe 4 months after we got married, I decided to run.
Oh, so, is that what you did?
I did do that.
Is that what you did?
I did do that.
That's wonderful.
Yes, yes.
Where'd you meet him?
I actually, when I was at Vincent & Elkins, we dated, and he was not quite ready for prime time, so I fired him. And then we met up many years later, and he was the same delightful person, but he'd just completely grown up, and he's amazing.
And it takes a while for us to grow up.
It takes a while for all of us to grow up, honestly.
Yeah. More for us, especially him.
I dated my wife, and I met my wife in 8th grade.
Wow.
In 8th grade, and we dated through high school. She pursued me through high school.
I see.
Yeah. And
that's a nice way to tell the story.
Yeah, exactly.
She's not watching anyways.
Yeah.
And I saw her on 6th Street at UT. I'm 5th year, and I said, "Hey, babe, you know I love you. I've always have." And then we were married.
And there was no alcohol involved in the process at all.
So I know this. What about you? What do you? I mean, you told us about a little bit about where you're from, or you really didn't, but you skimmed about it. I mean, where are you from?
I did skim it.
I know you did. I know you did.
Yeah, I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania on a horse farm. And
horse
so
farm.
I had a really shockingly idyllic childhood. And then I finished high school and went to college in New Jersey, where my parents were from. And I tried to keep my education cheap because it was already getting expensive. And so I went to public schools, and I ended up at Temple University, which is in Philadelphia. It's the U of H of Philadelphia, is the way I like to describe it. And so after I graduated from there, I moved. I had done some work at Georgetown in D.C. between my undergrad and my law school.
Where'd you go to law school?
Temple.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, and you skimmed over, but what brought you to Houston?
Because I had moved to Austin for a job, and then I ended up in Houston because I just loved it.
Where'd you live in Austin?
Just North Campus.
North Campus,
Yeah.
30th and Speedway.
32nd and Duval.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I was. Did you ever go to Crown and Anchor Pub?
Yeah, of course.
I was totally there. I was
world is so
totally
small.
yes. I was.
Austin is smaller than I wanted it to be, which is why I'm here. I really love the rural areas that I go to as I'm campaigning, but I really missed living in a large, diverse city, and Austin is just not a large, diverse city.
How have you been able to balance the campaigning in multiple counties and such?
I have a full-time law practice, but I also have a really supportive law partner who has taken on the lion's share of the work. And so I'm not married and I don't have kids. So for me, the campaigning has been difficult just in terms of work.
What made you? What was the inspiration behind you becoming a candidate for the Court of Appeals?
My law partner actually is the one who kind of talked me into it. I guess he's tired of practicing law with me, but but essentially,
So not so much an inspiration.
No, yeah, I know. Maybe a push.
A nudge.
So ultimately, though, I mean, it came down to the fact that I think that the court gets a lot of things wrong, and I think that especially with my work in the Fifth Circuit tends to look at Texas appellate cases a lot when they're looking at how to interpret state law when it comes to all sorts of different cases. And I think that the Texas appellate court decisions that I was reading in preparation for these Fifth Circuit briefs and arguments were just wrongly decided. And so,
aside from wrongly decided cases,
Yeah.
what are some of the bigger issues that y'all have with the current justices that made y'all want to get involved and make y'all want to be part of change? I mean, what part of the court do y'all want to change?
I would like to make the court kind of more the people's court as opposed to the justices' court.
Not like the Judge Wapner People's Court. But
No, less that.
Yes.
But for example, I kind of did a little listening tour of civil practitioners, and one thing they consistently said is that the court does not grant enough oral arguments. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably true.
I think you're right on that.
I rarely get oral argument in my cases, and I mean, and I'm not just saying this because they're my cases. These cases would get oral argument in the Fifth Circuit, and they're not over here. So I think we could certainly open the court more to the people, the parties who are practicing there.
I remember, so I'm sitting in the capital murder. I had some crazy jury charge issue, and Mario Madrid tells me, just call the public defender's office, and you'll get somebody, and you ask them the question. So I call, and I'm like, hey, so we're sitting in some capital murder, and we got some crazy jury instruction issue, and Sorcha answers the phone. Literally.
I remember that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I'm like, hey, so we have this issue, 1, 2, 3, 4, and Sorcha says, oh, that's look, just say this. And I go and say it, and we get our instruction.
it's like magic.
And it was literally like magic. And before then, I was kind of skeptical about Sorcha. But when she did that, I said, and it was grand, and I said, yes.
Automatic street cred with you.
She got the street cred because, like you said you have some trial experience, and you have a lot of trial. You have some trial experience, but your meat is on the appellate side, and I will say that the ability to call the public defender's office, and it just happened to be you, is just a phenomenal asset and resource, and you on the Court of Appeals, the public defender's office is going to lose that. Okay, they're going to lose it.
Vote for her anyway.
However,
I think they'll get over it.
well, I don't know, but they're going to lose. They're going to lose that. They're going to lose that. And so, knowing that, what was your inspiration behind running for the Court of Appeals? And knowing that, okay, so fine, later on, Sorcha is going to get this opinion, and she's going to take care of this. But what was you're going to leave that, and do you have any, looking back, like, you know, if you're going to sit there on a robe on the Court of Appeals, you're going to lose that, that thing. And so, what was your inspiration behind it, and why did you want to do it?
Well, my thought was, I've kind of, as you've noted, moved my career in a direction that is maybe curious to some, but it really had its own logic, which is I moved toward doing the most good. And although I really love working with Alex, I'm a huge fan of The Office and everyone I get to work with, I think this is a pretty logical next step. And I think it's a place where I could do more good than I currently am doing.
What do you think about the Fourth Amendment?
Fan.
Pro Fourth Amendment.
Look, we live in a day and age where the Fourth Amendment is getting ripped to shreds.
Can I take a little bit of an issue with that?
Take it.
The Fourth Amendment had a really good season in the U.S. Supreme Court. There's some great decisions even out of the Fifth Circuit. It's not a total wasteland. I want to be positive where I can be. And although there's a lot of bad news in a lot of criminal defense areas, the Fourth Amendment is actually having a bit of a moment, I think. I hope it continues.
Well, would you agree that some of that probably is because of the way technology is advancing, and maybe some of the fact that we are getting some newer justices involved who are maybe looking at things and looking at modern technology as it should be, and not people like what we have with David Souter, who never interacted
had a
with
cell phone.
technology.
What is a cell phone?
Yeah, what is a cell phone? What is this thing?
I think it was a cell phone search case where they took a non-smartphone case, and like someone had to tap the justices on the shoulder and say, you need also a smartphone case.
Well, and I can't, I read the opinion, it's got to be at least 3 or 4 years now, but it was essentially saying that you choose to, you know, put yourself in having a smartphone. And I read that and I'm like, and this was a Fifth Circuit opinion that they basically said, you know, you can make the choice not to engage in a cell phone use. And I sat there and I read it and I thought,
who is this you?
who is this? I mean, like, you could
Justice
choose,
of the Fifth Circuit.
Right, you could choose just not to participate in our society as it is in
You could go full
2014.
Unabomber
Yeah,
and
show on
opt
that.
out.
right.
Yes, you could do that,
You could do that.
hypothetically.
Off the
But
grid.
you would have no friends.
Right, no
you
friends.
would not be a participant in today's modern society. I mean,
And
so.
you're- But even then, you wouldn't have the privacy that you're entitled to under the Constitution. That's the unfortunate part because of drones.
Right. Yeah.
Drone surveillance.
Oh man, that's a whole nother story. But do you feel that we're finally starting to get people who maybe understand modern technology a little better and saying, hey, maybe we need to rein this back a little bit?
I do.
They've used modern technology, so that's at
Yeah.
least an improvement on what we have had. I don't necessarily know if I do think the Fourth Amendment I'm not as bullish on the Fourth Amendment as you are. I do think that
What does
compared,
that mean?
Well,
Whoa! What does that mean?
compared to, I don't have as.
I think she means she doesn't see a renaissance of Fourth Amendment.
Megan is maybe
case
not
law.
quite the optimist I am.
Yeah.
That's probably true. I tend to think that, especially when it comes to the Fifth Circuit, that they are much more concerned about the sanctity of certain other amendments and not necessarily the Fourth. The Fourth Amendment isn't necessarily their highest priority. So,
How do y'all feel? And I don't want to put you on a position, and certainly I got to be careful about how I ask the question, but one of the big things we're seeing both at the state and federal level is asset forfeiture, civil asset forfeiture, and the fact that, you know, the standard of proof, you've basically got to go out and the burden of proof is on you as the person who has had their assets seized to then show no connection. The state, who is actually the plaintiff in the case, has no burden. Does that really make any sense? I don't want to put you on the spot in terms of how you would answer the question, but I mean,
I think it's very ripe for potential abuse.
yeah, I mean, I know it's troubled a lot of appellate judges, and there's a lot of good dissents out there on this. I mean, you know, is that something that you see potentially being a hot button issue in Harris County too, because our DA's office is heavily funded by asset forfeiture?
I think that's problematic in terms of just the incentive.
Mm-hmm.
When I say ripe for abuse, creating those incentives is what makes it ripe for abuse. It probably is a legislative fix that needs to be made rather than a judicial one, but obviously you, as a justice, you have to look at the whole of the law and make sure that everything is being followed and what limitations there are on asset forfeiture need to be looked at.
and I mean, I would just add that I think that the potential for abuse is even greater in the smaller counties because they have such a larger percentage of their budget that's written into it. I mean, they write into their budgets a certain amount from asset forfeiture each year, and so there are perverse incentives to do that. And so I do think that there's an imperative that the appellate judges look at the entire picture and not just at, you know, like the square four corners of
I remember
that might be in front of them.
The funniest thing to me ever, it was when in Harris County, when the asset forfeiture docket, and I don't know if either of y'all have handled asset forfeiture cases here in Harris County.
Only in federal court.
Only in federal court.
So years ago, it used to be they were rubber stamped here. They had a judge that all the cases went to one judge, and it was just state got what the state wanted. And I'll never forget when they went into the wheel, and and started getting randomly assigned to courts for a session. And the first judge it got assigned to was Judge Sandil, and he made the state go down with it. And he said, "I'm really troubled by how some of these default notices and your public notices." He goes, "Before I sign any of your orders, we're going to take a field trip at lunch and go make sure that all your public notices comport with this."
Yeah, we're going to take a
Wow.
look at that.
And I'm just sitting there in the audience because I had a case that was next up, and I'm like, wow, I don't think they've ever heard that. And I mean, it takes a judge who's willing and not scared to say, you know what, state, you've got to follow the rules here. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like perhaps maybe for so long, even on the appellate courts, that hasn't necessarily always been the case. We always see the harmless error.
There is a surprising amount of harmless error.
Yeah. I mean, it can talk about that, because I don't think a lot of people really understand what that means. And it's a term that's often used in appellate courts to basically say, in my interpretation, I'd like y'all to expand on a little bit, but okay, something went wrong in your case, but there's also this out here, and so your error that you had, it's harmless.
Right. So when I mentioned before that I find that the courts of appeals tend to be pretty aggressive about finding waiver, right? Meaning that the error was not preserved at the trial court level. The other partner to that, in why a lot of cases get affirmed, is under the guise of harmless error, which is, as you said, yes, there was error, but this person is kind of guilty maybe, so we're going to say that that error did not produce any harm, did not procure the conviction. So that is what that is.
Yeah.
We call that looking inside the box in my field of work. The idea that the judges, when they are looking at a particular case, they look to the end and they see whether or not that individual did in fact possess any contraband. And so if they did, then they're much more likely to find that a search was reasonable, because they want to make that justified. They basically say, listen, this guy was a bad guy, and so the search was okay. But you can't do that as a you can't do that as a judge. You can't do it as a justice. That you have to look at these pieces in and of themselves. I've seen appellate court cases that have come out of the First and 14th Court of Appeals that talk about constitutional violations that are then adjudged to be harmless error. And I don't see how that's possible.
Right.
I don't see how you can have someone's rights, where someone's rights have been violated, and that be considered harmless error in the course of an entire case.
If the Dems come in, you really think there's going to be a shift on that law?
On which law?
On
harmless error?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Really?
Yes, I do.
I find one of the most chilling.
Can't be worse than it is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. It can't be any worse, because I find one of the more chilling parts of the harmless error, it has been the effect it has on lawyers advising their clients to testify, because that's one of the quickest ways that courts of appeals will right around any other error, and we as lawyers are forced to tell our clients, because maybe the only way we have to tell a certain part of the story is to have the defendant testify. And there's no other person that can testify or put in evidence of what happened except for our client. And the problem is that routinely, and this goes back to the very beginning of what I was arguing about, not invading the province of the jury, is they will say, well, the jury found him guilty. And, even though there was all this other error, the jury had his testimony, and they didn't believe it, and they still found him guilty.
I know, but at the same time, if you don't get to cross-examine the only evidence against you in a meaningful way,
right?
I'm not really sure that testimony had the weight it should have that your client gives.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's always been one of the more troubling ones for me, because I think it has, I talked about a couple weeks ago about how lawyers always complain about not getting trial work, and a lot of it has to be a lot of it is the way that you present the case to your client. I mean, you can almost talk a client into a plea,
You absolutely can.
without saying take the damn plea.
Right.
I mean, because of what you do. But part of that is, and part of being a good lawyer, you have to advise your clients of everything. And one of the things is, hey, look, you need to understand, you have the absolute right to testify, yes, but here's why I think you shouldn't. And that's a very scary proposition for a lot of people.
The trial that I had in federal court hinged hugely on my client's testimony, and everybody told me not to have him testify. But it was a mens rea case.
Yeah.
So how in the world do you talk about what you know without telling the jury what you know?
Or at the time.
How do you give the jury a sense of your client's state of mind without your client giving that? So I didn't think, as a juror, I would have bought it. I would not have understood why and how this happened if I would not have heard from the person who was involved.
And I think it's so critical because so many people don't understand that how we end up like that is because of what the courts of appeals have ruled historically.
Absolutely. And I mean, it happens on the civil side too,
Absolutely.
right? So on the criminal side, you have, you know, an attorney can talk to their client. They can talk them into taking a plea because they can say, well, at trial, this is what the jury is going to hear, and this is what the jury is going to believe, or this is the judge, and this is the kind of, you know, these are the issues that you're going to have from the judge. And then if we appeal, you're out of luck. And on the civil side, you have the exact same issue because even if you get a really big verdict from a jury, or even if you're in a mediation, the defense generally, you know, turns to you and says, yeah, you can win at trial, but what do you think the Court of Appeals is going to do to your verdict? And time after time after again, you get verdicts reversed and remanded or remitted, and it's just a significant problem.
So you have, what makes you think that you're qualified to hear appeals from the criminal side? I'll go on this side. What makes you think you're qualified to hear appeals on the civil side? Because
1 minute left, so you guys gotta.
Oh, that's a terrible, that's a tough question to finish on.
I've done both.
Same.
There you go.
That's the simple answer.
That's it. It's done. We're done. It's good. It's great.
Yeah. Well, what I do want you guys to do in the last minute here is just give a short, you know, few seconds of, you know, why everybody should vote for you for the Court of Appeals coming up in November. So,
Sure.
Meagan, I'll let you go first.
I believe that we need balance on the courts of appeals, and our dissent rate is ridiculously low right now on the 1st and 14th Court of Appeals. It's less than 0.1%. And so we really need more intellectual and honest dialogue between the justices.
Sorcha.
We need to restore meaningful appellate review for criminal cases in the Court of Appeals.
That's all you got?
That's amazing.
That's
super strong. I thought that is super strong.
That is
really super good.
That's powerful.
God, it's so good.
There you go.
We still got like 45 seconds.
I'm really succinct.
So awesome.
She's going to write very short opinions.
I don't know what else to do.
Reversed.
I don't know.
Reversed.
What else to do.
For
It's
good
great.
reasons.
Right.
And then everybody will just agree.
Well, you would think that. I mean, so what? I mean, realistically, in the little bit of time left, I mean, that we do have left, how many benches on the Court of Appeals? How many places in the Court of Appeals are up this time?
5 on each court.
Okay.
So that's the majority.
Majority of each court.
Okay. So that, I mean, that's this is a election where there can be some significant change made one way or another potentially.
It is a total game changer potentially.
On what happens.
It's a very big deal.
Get out and vote.
You said it.
Yeah.
That's all the time we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank both of our guests, Meagan Hassan and Sorcha Landau. She'll be listed as Sarah Beth Landau on the ballots. So I want to thank both of y'all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And I hope you guys will join us next week. Who we got next week, Julio?
Big time. I think it's Brad Hart and Chris Morton.
I think you're right.
Huge.
So we will have both candidates on for the Harris County 230th District Court on next week on Reasonable Doubts. So for Julio Vela and both of my guests this week, Meagan Hassan and Sorcha Landau, we'll see y'all next week. Good night and go Astros.